Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Israeli ministers team up for the election, and a Palestinian cabinet minister is killed in a protest. Checking in at Habad headquarters a week after a stabbing attack, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. It's often said about politics that you don't know whom you're electing until they're actually in office, but two Israeli politicians have put a fascinating twist on that this week. Two of the more popular figures in Israel, Tzipi Livni and Labor Party leader Isaac Herzog, are teaming up for the upcoming Israeli elections and saying that if they win, they'll switch off in the prime minister's role. Herzog would be prime minister for 2 years, and then Livni would be prime minister for 2 years. Even with this combination, a right-wing coalition led by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, possibly including ultra-Orthodox parties, is still overwhelmingly likely to win and be in place in 2015. But one group that also can't get enough votes is the Palestinian Authority. Hoping for a vote at the United Nations Security Council to set a deadline for Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank, senior Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat said this week that he doesn't think they have the 9 votes needed to win in the 15-member Security Council. This comes as several European nations are expressing a desire to recognize Palestine as a state, regardless of what happens in negotiations or votes. At the same time, a key figure in Israeli-Palestinian dialogue is the United States. And most Israelis think the U.S.-Israel relationship is in a, quote, crisis. A poll of Israelis commissioned by J Street had 61% of Israelis answering yes when asked if there is a crisis in U.S.-Israeli relations, and 60% of Israelis said Netanyahu has, quote, harmed the relationship. But despite that, Israelis were pretty evenly divided on the question of who has caused the crisis in U.S.-Israel relations. Approximately the same amount blamed President Barack Obama and Netanyahu, or blamed, quote, everyone equally. And amid much commentary from talking heads that a two-state solution is over, 61% of Israelis supported a two-state solution, though at the same time, 52% favored expansion of settlements in the West Bank. But in what some are calling a new low in Israeli-Palestinian relations, a Palestinian cabinet minister died last week after Israeli soldiers fired tear gas at a demonstration in which Palestinians carrying olive tree saplings were protesting Israeli land confiscations. Ziad Abu Ain was 55 years old. Saeb Erekat called his killing, quote, an assassination. Moving on, an anti-Semitic stabbing at an iconic synagogue last week rattled many who see the headquarters of the Habad Lubavitch movement as a beacon. Meredith Gansman followed up to see how they're moving on.
It's a normal day at the Habad Lubavitch World Headquarters in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Men and women have come to pray, but just a few days earlier was a very different scene. Early Tuesday morning on December 10th, Israeli rabbinical student Levi Rosenblatt was stabbed while praying here. The stabber was 49-year-old Long Island native Calvin Peters, reported to be emotionally disturbed and known to the police. An NYPD cop shot and killed Peters at the scene. Rosenblatt survived the stabbing. He is recovering at Bellevue Hospital, where his mother, Razi, has joined him from Israel. Moti Seligson, who works at Habad, says congregants were understandably disturbed that this attack could happen in their place of worship.
This was a shock to everyone here, and the communities come around together and things are settling down.
Congregant Sarah Best was also shocked by this news because she says the Crown Heights neighborhood is a peaceful one.
There's a really very strong sense of peace here. There's a feeling of being able to work together and create a community that's very beautiful, that's exemplary.
The Chabad is known for having an open-door policy, but after the attack, security reviews may change that.
You know, it needs to be a place where people can freely come and worship and come and feel the space, but somebody has to be taking a better look at things, what's going on over here. I'd definitely like to see more security personnel around. At the end of the day, though, we always have God. He always protects, and it's quite clear that that always happens.
Witnesses have reported that Calvin Peters repeated, "I'm gonna kill the Jews," as he entered the synagogue.
I would say it was probably an anti-Semitic act, but I think it was from somebody who was definitely not well.
For more on the Crown Heights Chabad, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. On a happier note, Hanukkah is here, and Bloomingdales has some recommendations for you. Meredith Gansman reports.
The holidays are a time of gift giving, and at Bloomingdale's, your gifts can also give back. Ann Keating says philanthropy is in Bloomingdale's DNA.
At Bloomingdale's, we realize it's not just what you get, it's what you get from giving. Not only are you pleasing yourself, but you're pleasing the other people, and you're also pleasing the charity.
For the 5th year, Bloomingdale's, founded in 1861 by Jewish brothers Joseph and Lyman G. Bloomingdale, is donating a percentage of its proceeds from some of its holiday merchandise to the Child Mind Institute.
So right now, one of our leading ones is obviously our bear that comes back each year in a different outfit. We also have this year been able to work with 2 of our vendors to come up with partnerships that create merchandise. And the one partnership that is quite lovely for children and children of all ages is the one with Michael Aram. So he's created from their lovely menorah to a snow globe to an ornament, picture frame.
And Alex and Ani has also partnered with the Institute to create collectible jewelry. Another gift is the Fight the Lady Killer scarf, proceeds from which go to Women's Heart Health, and which was designed with input from Barbara Streisand.
We actually partnered with Theodora and Callum, who actually worked with Barbara Streisand, who has a real passion about women's heart health.
One gift that never goes out of style is the gift of knowledge.
To have a colorful menorah that a child can relate to with the lovely animals on it really helps them really remember things and remember the Hanukkahs of their childhood as they bring up their own families.
So shopping can really work up an appetite, and Rihanna Zimmerman at Magnolia Bakery at Bloomingdale's has some delicious treats that are also going to make beautiful Hanukkah presents for your friends and family.
We have our classic cupcakes, which are chocolate and vanilla, topped with these delicious edible Hanukkah decorations. We also have Hanukkah shortbread and macaroons, which are both dipped in chocolate. We have our mini dreidel box of mini cupcakes, which is awesome for a gift or for bringing over for a celebration.
To see more from Bloomingdale's philanthropy efforts, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, this week on Up Close, art has been used throughout Jewish history to promote Jewish life and to condemn it. In a study of how medieval art came to portray Jews with what we now see as basic anti-Semitic symbols, SUNY Stony Brook professor Sarah Lipton suggests that in many cases, life was imitating art in dark mirror the medieval origins of anti-Jewish iconography. But going back even further, there was a time when Judaism was at the avant-garde of aesthetics, putting forward poetry that broke rules and invented new ones. Duke University professor Laura Lieber described this trend in A Vocabulary of Desire, the Song of Songs in the Early Synagogue. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Sarah Lipton. What you're doing with this book is in many ways kind of turning upside down common assumptions about anti-Semitism, where a lot of people just look at anti-Semitism and say, oh, it's just this broad brush thing. It's just, people hate Jews, so they come up with these things, and so they reflect that. But what you suggest is that, in fact, it's images of Jews that in many ways was able to foster specific types of anti-Semitism without anti-Semitism of that kind necessarily being the initial intent.
Yes, that's right. I'm not saying that images are the only place anti-Semitism existed or that they are responsible alone and solely for the creation of anti-Jewish feeling. But I think the role of images in creating anti-Jewish feeling and policies and actions has been very underestimated, and I really wanted to tell that story again and bring them back into the history. There's a difference between disapproving of Judaism, which Christians did from the very invention of Christianity because they differed on some very fundamental religious ideas, and hating Jewish people, a big difference. And one does not automatically slip into the other. And I think images played a fundamental role in making the connecting link between abstract ideas, disapproval of the way Jews read their text or disapproval of the ways reacted to Christ, and actual Jewish people walking around medieval Europe.
And you show this chronology of sorts, kind of these A-B matchups where image A turns up in certain depictions, say the year 1100, reality B shows up some years later. Yes. That whether it's the different signs that were imposed upon Jews, that they would have to wear hats or certain things.
Jews started to be shown wearing pointed hats sometime in the 11th century. I argue, after doing a lot of research, I can't believe how much time I spent reading about hats. or reading about the absence of any mention of hats. I spent a lot of time on hats to try and understand why Jews were shown with pointed hats, and I'm very convinced it's not because Jews walked around 11th century Europe wearing pointed hats. There's absolutely zero evidence for Jews doing that. After Jews are shown wearing pointed hats for decades and decades and decades, people start thinking we should be able to tell a Jew by looking at them and by seeing what they're wearing. And they look around Europe and they notice we cannot tell Jews by looking at them. Jews don't wear distinctive clothing. And finally in 1215, almost 200 years after the first image of a Jew in a pointed hat, we have legislation saying Jews need to wear distinctive clothing because it is important that we be able to look at them and tell who they are. And it wasn't until some decades after that, in 1267, we finally have two church councils saying that distinctive clothing should be pointed hats, because that's what Jews' ancestors used to wear.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast, available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well.